All right, so we're diving into a mystery today, one that just seems to keep going and going. The death of Elvis Presley. You wanted to know more than just the headlines, and I think we found just the thing to help us do that. For today's deep dive, we're cracking open the death of Elvis. What really happened?
Oh, yeah. This one's by Charles C. Thompson and James P. Cole.
Right. And they say they found some pretty big holes in the official story. They even hint at a possible cover-up. What do you think about that?
Well, what's really interesting about this book is that it's not just repeating the same old theories, right? Like, it really takes you behind the scenes, shows you actual evidence and firsthand accounts that really make you question what we think we know.
So we're going beyond just the what happened to, like, why did it happen this way?
Exactly. Like, why would certain details be, let's just say, massaged a little bit, for the public? Like, oh, take the day Elvis died.
Oh, at Graceland.
Right, Graceland. The book describes it as total chaos, like the ambulance rushing him to Baptist Memorial Hospital, sirens blaring.
Trying to get him there as fast as possible.
Exactly. But then there's this weird detail about Elvis being admitted as John Doe and a note on the form saying, no publicity. What's that all about?
So it sounds like they were trying to keep things quiet. But wouldn't the hospital staff, they'd recognize him right away.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? I mean, come on, it's the king of rock and roll. In his pajamas and a gold chain, no less. Hard to miss that. But this whole secrecy thing, plus all the different stories about how they found Elvis, well, it just raises a bunch of red flags.
Yeah, officially they said he was found in bed.
Right, peacefully in bed. But the paramedics who were actually there, they said they found him on the bathroom floor.
So why change a detail like that? What were they trying to hide?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And this book digs into the days leading up to Elvis's death, and you start to see all these tangled relationships and tensions that might have played a part. Like, there was some friction between Ginger Alden, his fiancée, and his stepbrother, David Stanley.
It's tough to imagine all that pressure and scrutiny on the people closest to him, especially in those final days.
Absolutely. And this book, it doesn't shy away from those hard questions at all. It also looks at how Elvis was feeling mentally, especially with his tour coming up and the promise he made to his daughter, Lisa Marie, about taking her to Graceland when he got back.
That is really sad to think about, knowing he had so much to look forward to.
And that's where this book goes beyond just celebrity gossip. It
Yeah.
shows Elvis as a real person, a father, a fiancé, a man trying to deal with the weight of his fame.
So we've got the scene, we've got the conflicting accounts, we've got the personal stuff. What about the actual investigation, though?
Right. Well, a lot of the book focuses on Dan Warlick, the medical examiner. He was a pretty young guy at the time, and he'd actually worked on a case involving Elvis before. You can only imagine the pressure he must have been under.
I bet, yeah, with everybody watching and waiting for answers.
Absolutely. And I'm sure some things just seemed off right from the start. Like, there weren't any drugs found in his bedroom or bathroom. That's what they said anyway.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But they did find 2 empty syringes.
That doesn't add up, does it? Knowing what we know now about prescription drugs back then, especially considering the toxicology reports that came out later.
You're telling me? Then the book takes you through the autopsy itself. It's pretty amazing how much some of what they found goes against what everybody thought they knew about Elvis. Like, he wasn't as tall or as heavy as people believed. Not even close.
It really makes you think about how much of what we see about famous people is just, a carefully crafted image.
That's right. And the autopsy revealed more than just, physical stuff. They found that his liver and spleen were enlarged.
What does that mean?
Well, it could mean all sorts of things, but it definitely pointed towards some potential health problems he had going on. But there wasn't much damage to his heart, and that raised doubts about whether he really died of a heart attack like they first thought.
So it wasn't as simple as they first thought.
Not at all. Which brings us to the toxicology report. The lab, Bioscience, they used some pretty high-tech stuff for the time to analyze his blood.
And what'd they find?
Well, they found a lot of codeine, and quaaludes, and Placidil, and a bunch of other drugs too, actually. All way beyond what a normal dose would be.
Wow. So he wasn't just taking his meds as prescribed. It sounds pretty serious.
It really does. And this is where the book starts looking at who might have had a hand in all this. Like some of his doctors and even people in his inner circle.
But wouldn't the police, wouldn't they have looked into that?
Well, that's where things get a bit messy. The book really goes after Dr. Jerry Francisco, who was the medical examiner for Memphis at the time. He did some things that, looking back now, seem really strange.
What do you mean? Like, what did he do?
Well, for one, he signed the death certificate saying the cause of death was a heart problem before he even had the toxicology results back.
Wait, so before he knew for sure, that seems a bit rushed, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. And the book suggests that maybe Dr. Francisco was more worried about controlling the story, keeping Elvis's image clean, than he was about actually finding out the truth.
So are they saying it was a cover-up?
Well, they definitely make a pretty strong case. And it wasn't just about the toxicology report either. Dr. Francisco tried to control what information the press got, and he fought really hard against anyone trying to make the full autopsy report public.
Like he was trying to hide something.
You could definitely see it that way. But the good news is that not everybody just accepted what they were being told. The book talks about two investigators who decided to dig a little deeper, and they weren't afraid to challenge the official story.
Who were they?
One was a reporter named Beth Tamke. She was really tenacious. And the other was a pathologist, Dr. Harold Sexton. They both thought something wasn't right and started doing their own research, talking to people and looking at medical records.
Like detectives.
Yeah.
Trying to piece together a different story.
Exactly. And what they found pointed to a lot of overprescribing by Elvis's doctors, maybe even drug abuse.
And there was that one doctor, right? The one they called Dr. Feelgood.
Oh, yeah. Dr. Max Shapiro. He was known for doing some pretty unorthodox things, like visiting celebrities at their homes in the middle of the night. And he'd prescribe drugs without even giving them a proper exam.
So like whatever you want, whenever you want it.
Pretty much. And of course, that raises a lot of questions about his part in all of this, ethically speaking.
No kidding. That's a big deal. But before we get into that, there's another thing the book talks about, right?
Yeah.
That Elvis might have had bone cancer.
Right. That was a big claim. It came from Dick Grob, who used to be part of Elvis's entourage, the authors of the book, and a team from the show 2020 actually looked into it. They talked to the medical people who did the autopsy.
And what happened?
Well, they didn't find any sign of bone cancer when they did the autopsy. But there's this whole other mystery about an interview tape that got lost, an interview that might have had more information about the cancer thing.
Oh, wow. So even more suspicious stuff.
Yeah, you could say that. But even without the cancer thing, the book lays out a whole lot of evidence that makes it seem like drugs played a big part in Elvis's death, at the very least.
Like that last prescription for Deload. It's a super strong painkiller. And his stepbrother, Ricky Stanley, filled it just a few hours before he died.
Exactly. And it's not just cold, hard facts either. The book tells the stories of the people who were there, like the pharmacist who filled that last prescription.
Yeah.
He was clearly struggling with what happened.
It reminds you that this isn't just some abstract case. It's real people, real lives caught up in this whole thing.
Absolutely. And it really makes you think, what if things had been different? What if Elvis had gotten help?
Yeah, a question that fans probably still ask themselves. But for now, let's talk about how the media reacted to Elvis's death.
Oh, right, because the book talks about that too, right? How the news just exploded and all the speculation and conspiracy theories that came out, especially back then, before the internet and social media. It really shows you how much power the media has, right? Like how they can shape what people think, especially when it's someone as big as Elvis.
And with all those rumors flying around,
Yeah.
no wonder some people thought Dr. Francisco was trying to cover things up.
Yeah, trying to downplay the whole drug thing and not letting anyone see the full autopsy report. I mean, that definitely made people suspicious.
But like you said before, we had Beth Tamke and Dr. Sexton trying to find out what really happened. What did they actually find?
Well, Tamke, she was a reporter, right? And she found out that Elvis was seeing a whole bunch of different doctors in those last few months.
Oh, really? A whole bunch?
Yeah, which makes you wonder, how well was he being taken care of? And Dr. Sexton, he's the pathologist, well, he did his own analysis and said that the amount of drugs they found in Elvis was just way too much, not normal at all.
So they were saying something totally different than the official story. Did they get in trouble for speaking out?
Oh, yeah. The book talks about how people tried to stop them, They were pressured to keep quiet, and some people tried to make their work look bad. It's pretty amazing they kept going. They were really brave.
It's like a classic story, right? The little guy against the system.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe they didn't solve the whole mystery, but they definitely made people look at the case again, even though, like we said, the official cause of death is still cardiac arrhythmia.
Which doesn't really tell us much, does it? But you mentioned earlier that the book talks about the science stuff, too, the forensics. Tell me more about that.
Oh, yeah. It's actually really interesting. The authors do a good job of explaining all the complicated stuff in a way that's easy to understand. Like, they talk about how the lab, bioscience, used this fancy technique called gas chromatography mass spectrometry.
Okay, hold on. Break that down for me. What is that exactly?
Well, think of it like this. You have a bunch of different things mixed together, and you want to know what each thing is, right? This technique lets you separate them all out and then figure out exactly what each one is made of, like a fingerprint for chemicals.
Oh, so they use that to figure out exactly which drugs were in Elvis's system.
Yep, that's right. And the results, well, let's just say they were pretty surprising.
Speaking of surprising, let's get back to Dr. Francisco for a minute. The book really doesn't hold back on him, does it?
Nope, not at all. And it's not just about Elvis either. They talk about other cases where he was involved, and it seems like he had a habit of doing things that weren't quite right. Like he didn't really care about following the rules.
That's kind of scary. To think someone in his position might have been doing things that were wrong, maybe even stopping justice from being served.
It's a good reminder that even in cases that seem pretty simple, there could be other things going on behind the scenes, people trying to control the story.
And with someone like Elvis, I bet that was even more intense. Like his death became this whole battle over what really happened.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's like different groups all had their own reasons for wanting people to believe a certain version of the story.
But beyond all the mystery and drama, I think what really gets people is the human side of it all.
Yeah, for sure. The book does a great job of showing Elvis as a real person. Not just the king, but someone who made mistakes, who had problems, who just wanted to be loved.
And that's what makes it so sad. Even with all the money and fame, he couldn't escape the things that were hurting him.
And it's a reminder for all of us, it doesn't matter who you are or how famous you are, we all have weaknesses.
That's a good point. So as we finish up our deep dive, what are the big things you want people to remember?
Well, I think this book shows how important it is to think for yourself, to question what you're told and try to find the real truth. And it shows how important it is for people to be honest, especially when they have power.
Those are good things to remember in any investigation, especially one like this. But for me, the biggest thing is that addiction is a real problem, and people need to get help if they're struggling with it.
That's a powerful message. And Elvis's story is a really sad example of that.
Yeah, it is. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the death of Elvis Presley. We looked at the evidence, talked about the different theories, and saw how this whole thing affected the people involved.
It's been a really interesting journey, hasn't it? A little unsettling at times, but definitely interesting.
It has. And now it's up to you, our listeners, to decide what you believe. What do you think really happened to Elvis Presley? It's a question that I'm sure people are still talking about. It shows you how much Elvis still means to people, even now.
He was so much more than just a singer, though, right? He was like this huge cultural icon. He represented change and rebellion. And I think his death, in a way, kind of reflected all the craziness that was going on back then.
Like his life and his death, they were a reflection of what society was like back then. All the hopes and dreams and all the bad stuff, too.
That's an interesting way to think about it. It makes you wonder what would have happened if he'd lived longer. Would he have changed his music? Would he have tried different styles?
We'll never know. But I bet he would have kept making music that people loved.
Yeah, no doubt. But aside from all the music and fame, we have to remember Elvis the person, right? He was a father who loved his daughter, a fiancé who was planning a future with someone, a friend who was fighting his own battles.
It's easy to get lost in all the conspiracies and mysteries. But in the end, this is a story about a real person who was under a lot of pressure and just couldn't overcome his problems.
And that reminds us that no matter who we are, how much money we have, or how famous we are, we all have weaknesses.
That's a good thing to keep in mind. And I hope that's something people listening take away from our deep dive.
Me too. This book, and talking about it today, I think it's helped us understand a little bit more about what happened to Elvis, and about fame, addiction, and trying to find the truth.
Well said. And with that, we've come to the end of our journey into the life and death of Elvis Presley. We looked at all the evidence, we talked about the different theories, and we got a glimpse into what was going on in his life.
It was fascinating, and yeah, a little bit creepy at times too, but it was worth it to learn more about a really complex person.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. And remember, keep thinking about it. Keep asking questions and keep searching for your own answers.